The grand hall was filled with people, all of them waiting for the concert to begin. The lights were dim, and a hush fell over the audience as the famous pianist walked onto the stage. She was elegant and confident, carrying herself like someone used to being admired. Every eye followed her as she sat at the large, shining piano at the center of the stage. The audience held their breath in expectation. The pianist raised her hands and began to play. Her fingers moved quickly and precisely across the keys, producing a sound that was technically perfect. Every note was clear, every chord exact. People clapped politely after each piece, impressed by her skill, but there was a distance in the room, a kind of formal admiration rather than warmth. Meanwhile, in the back of the hall, a janitor quietly moved about, pushing a mop and adjusting chairs. He had been working in this hall for years and knew every corner of it. He often stayed after hours, listening to the echoes of music that lingered long after the audience had left. Music had always been a part of his life, even though he had never had the chance to study it formally. He loved it, loved the way it could change the air, make people feel something without saying a word. While the pianist continued her performance, he could not help but tap his fingers on the handle of his mop, following the rhythm of the piece. Something in him stirred as he listened. When the concert ended, the audience clapped loudly, cheering and calling for an encore. The pianist stood and bowed, accepting the applause with a slight smile that hinted at pride. As the crowd began to settle, the janitor hesitated. He had been dreaming of this moment for years, a foolish, quiet dream that no one could possibly take seriously. He walked slowly toward the stage, carrying himself with as much courage as he could gather. He stopped a few steps from the piano and cleared his throat gently. His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the room, but he asked politely if he might try to play a few notes. The pianist looked at him and then back at the audience. She laughed softly, a sound meant to be light but sharp enough to sting. "Do you really expect to play this piano?" she said, her tone dripping with disbelief. The janitor felt his face heat, but he did not retreat. There was something inside him stronger than embarrassment, a need to try. He tried to explain that he had been practicing, that music was a part of him, but his words were lost in the tension of the hall. The pianist shook her head and smiled at the audience as if to say, "Can you believe this?" A few people shifted uneasily in their seats. Some were embarrassed by the public mockery, but no one intervened. The janitor took a step back, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, some judging, some curious, some amused. He turned slightly, unsure if he should leave. In that moment, he remembered the nights he had spent at the piano in empty rooms, the small melodies he had taught himself, the hours he had spent learning by ear, feeling the music rather than thinking about it. He remembered how the piano had always been a friend, something that listened and never judged. He closed his eyes for a brief second, taking a deep breath, and made a silent promise to himself. This was not about proving the pianist wrong. It was about proving something to himself. It was about music, nothing else. The hall began to quiet as people sensed the tension. The janitor stepped back from the stage slowly, letting the moment pass. The audience still buzzed, whispering among themselves. The pianist returned to her seat and continued with her post-performance gestures, accepting gifts and shaking hands, the mockery already fading into her memory. But in the janitor's heart, something had changed. The humiliation did not crush him. It fueled a quiet determination. He knew that one day he would play, and when he did, it would not matter what anyone thought. It would not be a performance for applause or recognition. It would be a performance born from love, from a need to express something too deep for words. After the hall emptied and the last notes of the evening lingered like a fading echo, the janitor stayed behind. He carefully removed the chairs, swept the floors, and polished the edges of the piano that had so captivated him. When he finally sat down in front of it, alone, he allowed his fingers to brush over the keys, feeling the familiar resistance and the familiar warmth of the wood. He began to play softly at first, almost as if testing the air, feeling each note vibrate through him. The music that came out was simple at first, a melody he had kept in his head for years, a song that told stories of his childhood, his dreams, his struggles. As he continued, the melodies became richer, deeper, more intricate. He was not playing for anyone but himself, and yet the sound filled the hall in a way that seemed to hold the space still. He closed his eyes and lost himself in the music, allowing the feelings he had bottled up for so long to flow through his fingers. Hours passed unnoticed. The moonlight through the tall windows fell across the keys, and the echoes of his playing seemed to linger longer than any applause could. It was in those quiet moments that he discovered the true power of music, not as a show, not as a display of skill, but as a voice for what was inside. Though he left the hall before sunrise, he walked out with a quiet confidence. He knew that he would return, that this was only the beginning. Somewhere deep inside, he understood that his time to share music publicly would come, and when it did, it would be a moment that no one would forget. For now, he held on to the memory of that stage, the feel of the keys, the sound that had been waiting inside him all these years. The story of that night, of the mockery, of the quiet determination that followed, would stay with him forever. The janitor returned to his daily routine the next morning, pushing mops and arranging chairs as he always did. No one in the hall knew of the music he had played alone, but it had changed him. It had given him a purpose beyond his daily tasks, a secret hope that grew with each passing day. And in the corners of the grand hall, in the echoes of the piano, there was a promise that one day, music would speak for him in a way words never could. That promise kept him going, and it would guide him toward a future he had once only dared to imagine. After that night, the janitor could not stop thinking about the piano. Every day he moved through the grand hall, pushing mops and dusting chairs, but his mind was elsewhere. He would replay the feeling of the keys under his fingers, the resonance of the sound, the way it seemed to breathe life into the empty hall. Music had always been a quiet companion, a secret in his life that no one knew about. He had learned to love it in small moments, listening to old records on a scratched radio, humming melodies to himself, tapping rhythms on the walls and floors of his home. But now, with the memory of the grand piano, that love felt stronger, more urgent, like a part of him had been waiting for this chance to come alive. After work one evening, when the hall was empty and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and old curtains, he returned to the piano. He adjusted the bench, feeling its familiar firmness, and placed his hands gently on the keys. He began with simple scales, letting his fingers remember what they had learned through years of listening, feeling, and small secret practices. Then he moved on to melodies he had composed in his mind over countless nights. Each note carried emotion, memories of childhood joys, hardships he had endured, the quiet longing that had always been inside him. Slowly, the music began to fill the hall. He had never played in front of anyone before, and yet there was a freedom in it that he had never known. The music was imperfect, but it had soul, and in that moment, he understood what music truly meant. Hours passed as he played. He experimented with sounds, finding ways to make simple notes speak like sentences, like stories. He imagined an audience, not one of critics or teachers, but of people who could feel what he felt. He played with lightness and with depth, with joy and with sorrow, letting the piano carry every feeling he had ever held. One evening, as he played, a cleaning assistant who had stayed late peeked in quietly. She stopped in the doorway, mesmerized by the sound. She had never heard anyone play like this, not even the pianist who had filled the hall with her precise and perfect notes. The music was raw, alive, and full of feeling. The janitor did not notice her at first. He was too absorbed in the notes, in the rise and fall of the melody. When he finally looked up, he saw her watching, eyes wide, silent tears glistening. She nodded slightly, understanding the depth of what she was hearing, and slipped away, leaving him to continue in peace. The janitor's evenings became a ritual. He would finish his work and then sit at the piano, playing until the last echo faded. He explored new pieces, often improvising, letting his imagination guide his fingers. Sometimes he would play slow, soft pieces that whispered through the hall, and other times, he would pound out bold, powerful chords that seemed to shake the floorboards. Music became his companion, his solace, his secret world where nothing else mattered. In the meantime, small details in his life began to change. He walked a little taller, carried himself with a quiet confidence, and hummed tunes that were more complex than before. His co-workers noticed a certain calmness in him, a serenity that came from somewhere deep within, though none could guess its source. One day, a maintenance worker mentioned an upcoming event at the hall. A charity concert was being organized, and the famous pianist would perform again. People were invited, and the event was expected to attract a large audience. The janitor listened quietly as others discussed it, a strange feeling stirring in him. He had never imagined performing for anyone. The idea terrified him, but at the same time, it ignited something he could not ignore. The thought of playing in front of an audience, of sharing the music that had lived only in the walls of the empty hall, began to take shape in his mind. He pictured the piano, the stage, the lights, and the faces of the audience, all waiting to hear what he had to offer. The fear was strong, but stronger still was the desire to let the music speak. In the weeks that followed, he practiced relentlessly. Every evening, after his janitorial duties, he sat at the piano and played for hours. He tried new pieces, experimented with rhythms, and worked on improvisation. He would play songs he had made up in his head, letting them evolve as he went, discovering nuances he had never noticed before. The hall had become a private studio, and the janitor a dedicated student of the music he loved. During this time, he reflected on his life. He remembered how, as a child, he had been fascinated by the piano in the community hall near his home. He had watched children take lessons, their fingers moving with ease, their eyes lighting up with accomplishment. He had wanted to join, but his family could not afford lessons. So he had learned in secret, copying melodies from old records, teaching himself by listening and repeating. Now, all those years later, his years of quiet practice had coalesced into something remarkable. He realized that talent could exist without formal training, that passion and dedication could create music that reached the heart, not just the mind. One evening, while practicing a new melody, he began to feel something shift. The music was no longer just a private expression. It felt as though it could reach others, move them, touch their hearts. He imagined the audience at the charity event, picturing their reactions, feeling the possibility of connection. The thought both terrified and thrilled him. Could he really share his music with the world? Would they understand it? Would they feel what he felt? These questions raced in his mind, but he continued to play, each note answering them in its own way. The janitor's life began to revolve around this dual existence. By day, he swept floors, polished wood, and arranged chairs. By night, he transformed into a musician, creating, exploring, and expressing. This balance gave him a sense of purpose and fulfillment he had never known. It was in these quiet, solitary moments that he realized the true power of music. It was not about applause, recognition, or fame. It was about connection, about expressing what could not be said in words, about touching something universal in everyone who listened. The more he played, the more he understood that music could transcend social boundaries, that a janitor with no formal training could evoke emotions as deeply as a professional. He thought of the pianist who had mocked him, and he felt no anger, only a calm determination. One day, he overheard a group of staff members discussing the upcoming concert again. Someone joked that it would be amusing if he tried to perform. The comment, meant to be lighthearted, stirred something inside him. He realized that perhaps the time had come. Perhaps it was no longer enough to play in secret. Perhaps the music that had lived in him for so long was ready to be shared. The idea was terrifying, but he could not deny the pull of it. He began to imagine stepping onto the stage, sitting before the grand piano, and letting the music speak. He thought of the audience, of the pianist, of everyone who would hear him. He imagined the astonishment, the surprise, the possibility that his music could move them. The thought filled him with both fear and exhilaration. He began to practice with this new vision in mind. He focused not just on the notes, but on the feeling, the expression, the way the music could tell a story. He experimented with tempo, dynamics, and phrasing, letting the piano become an extension of his own voice. Each evening, he pushed himself further, discovering capabilities he had never imagined. The hall, once a place of work, had become a sanctuary, a laboratory, a world where his imagination and skill could flourish. Over time, the janitor began to notice small changes in himself. He walked with more confidence, spoke with calm assurance, and carried a quiet pride that had nothing to do with others' approval. His co-workers noticed the difference, sensing a new energy in him, though they did not know its source. He knew that the true test of his music would come one day, when he could share it with others. That thought both excited and frightened him. Yet, the fear no longer held him back. Instead, it pushed him to refine his craft, to explore new ideas, and to deepen his understanding of the music he loved. One evening, as the sun set and the hall was bathed in golden light, he played a piece he had composed entirely in his mind. The melody was soft and tender at first, then grew stronger, full of emotion and color. He closed his eyes and let the music guide him, feeling every note, every chord, every pause. The sound filled the hall, lingering in the air long after the final note had faded. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He understood that music was not just something he did. It was who he was. The janitor had discovered a hidden life, a secret world of expression and beauty that had always been within him. And he knew that someday, when the right moment came, he would step out of the shadows and let that music be heard by others. Until then, he would continue to practice, to create, and to let the piano be his voice. A voice that carried dreams, hope, and the power of a heart that refused to be silenced. The charity concert was approaching quickly, and the janitor found himself thinking about it more and more. He had spent weeks practicing in secret, pouring every ounce of his energy into music. Every evening, after cleaning the hall and finishing his daily tasks, he sat at the grand piano, experimenting with melodies and harmonies, imagining how the audience might respond. The idea of performing publicly was still terrifying, but the thought of sharing the music that had lived only in his heart became stronger than his fear. One afternoon, while fixing a chair backstage, he overheard two staff members talking about the concert. They discussed the performers, the seating arrangements, and the schedule. One of them jokingly said, "It would be funny if the janitor tried to play. Imagine a cleaner on stage trying to compete with the famous pianist." The words were meant as a joke, but they struck something deep inside the janitor. He felt a sudden spark of resolve. Perhaps this was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the moment when he could step out of the shadows and let his music speak for him. That evening, he returned to the piano with a different mindset. He did not play just to practice. He played as if preparing for an audience, imagining every note reaching the ears of listeners who might be moved, surprised, or even skeptical. His fingers moved faster, his emotions poured into the music, and each melody felt more alive than ever before. He experimented with techniques he had never tried, exploring the full range of the piano, discovering new sounds, and learning how to make the instrument sing in ways he had only imagined. At times, he stumbled, hitting wrong notes or hesitating, but he refused to stop. He knew that mistakes were part of learning, and that his music needed to be authentic, not perfect. Each evening, his confidence grew. He began to think about how he would approach the stage, how he would hold himself, and how he would connect with the audience without saying a word. He practiced walking onto the stage, sitting at the piano, and taking a deep breath before playing. The act itself became part of his preparation, as important as the music itself. Days passed quickly, and the janitor began to notice small changes in his life. He walked taller, spoke with a quiet assurance, and felt a new sense of purpose. His coworkers noticed the difference too. They remarked on his calm presence, his focused demeanor, and the sense of energy that seemed to surround him. But no one could guess the reason behind it. The janitor also thought about the pianist who had mocked him weeks ago. At first, he had felt embarrassment and a hint of anger, but now, those feelings were replaced by determination and calm resolve. He realized that her doubt would not define him, nor would it control the music that lived inside him. He decided that his performance, if it happened, would not be about proving anyone wrong. It would be about sharing the music that had been a part of his life for so long, expressing what he could not say with words. The day of the rehearsal came, and the hall was quieter than usual. The staff were arranging chairs, setting up lighting, and checking instruments. The janitor waited until most people had left, then approached the piano. He sat down, feeling the familiar weight of the keys beneath his fingers. This time, he focused on expression more than technique. He allowed his emotions to guide him, letting the music tell a story of struggle, hope, and quiet determination. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one carrying meaning, each melody rising and falling like a conversation with the hall itself. A few late-arriving staff members paused to listen, mesmerized by the sound. One whispered to another, saying that they had never heard anyone play with such emotion. The janitor played until the last echo faded, then stood and walked away, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He knew that he was ready, even if he had not yet faced an audience. That evening he could not sleep. His mind raced with possibilities, imagining every scenario. The applause, the gasps, the surprised faces, and the reactions of the pianist. Fear and excitement intertwined, creating a restless energy he could not ignore. He rose early the next day, determined to make final preparations. He spent the morning revisiting pieces, refining passages, and visualizing every movement. He thought about timing, about dynamics, about how to make each note count. Every detail mattered, and he embraced the process with quiet focus. In the days leading up to the event, the janitor also reflected on his own journey. He remembered the nights of secret practice, the countless hours of listening and learning, the small victories and mistakes that had brought him to this point. He understood that this performance was not just about a single evening. It was the culmination of a lifetime of love for music, dedication, and patience. As the day of the charity concert arrived, the hall filled with people. The audience buzzed with anticipation, eager to hear the famous pianist perform. The janitor, dressed simply in his work clothes, waited backstage. He could hear the soft murmur of the crowd, the occasional laughter, and the rustling of programs. His heart beat rapidly, but he focused on steadying his breath and centering himself. He reminded himself that the music was his voice, that it could express what words could not. When it was time for the first performer to take the stage, the pianist appeared, confident and poised. She played with her usual precision, every note perfect, and the audience applauded politely. The janitor watched from the wings, feeling both awe and determination. He knew that soon, it would be his turn. Backstage, the janitor took a moment to collect himself. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and let the music he had practiced in secret fill his mind. He imagined the audience, not as strangers, but as listeners who could feel the stories in his melodies. He focused on connection rather than fear, on expression rather than judgment. Then the moment arrived. The stage manager called his name, and he walked forward, stepping into the light. The audience murmured, some curious, some skeptical. The janitor approached the piano, each step measured, each breath steady. He sat down, adjusted the bench and rested his hands on the keys. A hush fell over the hall. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the music flow. The first notes were soft, tentative, yet full of emotion. The melody rose, weaving a story that spoke of longing, hope, and quiet strength. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the unexpected depth of expression. As the janitor continued, his confidence grew. The music became richer, more powerful, more alive. He played with passion, improvisation, and feeling, allowing the piano to become an extension of himself. Each chord, each note, carried emotion that transcended his position, his background, and his lack of formal training. The audience was spellbound. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, caught by the raw beauty of the performance. Others whispered softly, unable to believe that a janitor, Someone they had likely seen only cleaning floors could create such music. The hall was filled not just with sound, but with emotion. The janitor continued, unaware of time, unaware of the astonished faces around him. He was lost in the music, giving it everything he had, expressing everything he had kept hidden for years. The notes sang, soared, and whispered, carrying the audience on a journey of feeling and imagination. When the final note faded, there was a pause, a moment of stunned silence. Then, the audience erupted into applause, some rising to their feet. The janitor opened his eyes, seeing faces full of awe and admiration. He realized that he had not only shared his music, but had connected with others in a way that went beyond words. The pianist, who had once mocked him, was also silent, watching. Her expression a mix of surprise, respect, and understanding. The janitor rose from the bench, bowed slightly, and stepped back, a humble smile on his face. He had faced his fear, embraced his passion, and allowed the music to speak. In that moment, he understood that the journey mattered more than the applause. The courage to try, the dedication to practice, and the willingness to express himself had brought him here. And this was only the beginning. The hall was filled with soft murmurs as the audience waited for the next performer. The first pianist had finished, her flawless technique earning polite applause, and now the attention shifted to the next act. Backstage, the janitor adjusted his sleeves and took a deep breath. His heart pounded, but he reminded himself that the music he loved was his guide. He walked toward the stage, each step echoing softly on the wooden floor. As he reached the piano, a hush fell over the audience. Whispers spread, curiosity mingled with doubt. Some people leaned forward, trying to understand why a janitor was about to perform in a hall filled with professionals. He sat down, his hands hovering above the keys. The stage lights warmed his face, and the audience seemed to hold its breath. He closed his eyes and remembered every night of practice, every melody he had learned, every note he had imagined. He let those memories guide his fingers, feeling the connection between his heart and the piano. The first note was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried emotion that no one expected. The music seemed to rise from the floor, filling the hall with warmth and light. The janitor played as he had never played before, each movement of his hands telling a story. He did not focus on perfection. He focused on feeling, on expressing the emotions that had lived inside him for so long. The audience listened, captivated. At first, there was silence, a quiet uncertainty as they adjusted to the unexpected performance. Then the music began to speak to them, each note carrying depth and meaning. People leaned forward, their eyes widening, some holding their breath, some closing their eyes to feel it more fully. The janitor's playing was unlike anything they had heard. It was not about technique alone, though he was skilled. It was about the music itself, alive and expressive, as though it had grown from the hall and the hearts of the listeners. Even the pianist who had mocked him weeks ago sat in stunned silence. She listened carefully, realizing that this music was not about training or status. It was about connection, about sharing what was inside. The janitor continued, his confidence growing with every measure. He let the music carry him, allowing improvisation and emotion to flow freely. Each note built on the last, rising and falling like waves, pulling the audience along in a journey they did not expect but could not resist. Some people were moved to tears, touched by the vulnerability and sincerity of the performance. Others were astonished, unable to comprehend that someone so unlikely could create such beauty. The janitor did not notice the reactions. He was fully immersed in the music, his hands and heart working as one. He felt a sense of liberation, a joy that came from giving everything he had without hesitation or fear. Time seemed to stretch and bend. Minutes became hours in his mind, though in reality only a few songs passed. The hall was filled with sound, alive and breathing. The music painted pictures, told stories, and reached deep into the hearts of those listening. When he finally reached the end of his performance, he let the last note linger, fading slowly into the silence of the hall. For a moment, there was no sound, No movement, only the echo of what had been played. Then the audience erupted in applause, a wave of appreciation, astonishment, and admiration. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, some even crying. The janitor opened his eyes, seeing the expressions on their faces. They were stunned, moved, and grateful for the gift he had shared. The pianist who had once mocked him approached slowly, her expression a mix of surprise, respect, and humility. She extended her hand, acknowledging the talent and courage she had underestimated. The janitor smiled, accepting the gesture, not with pride, but with a quiet gratitude. He had played for himself, for the music, and for the connection it could create. The hall buzzed with energy. People discussed the performance, amazed that someone they had seen only as a janitor could create such an emotional experience. The story of the night would be shared for weeks, inspiring those who heard it and reminding them that talent could come from the most unexpected places. After the concert, the janitor returned to the empty hall. The stage was quiet, the seats vacant, and the piano still glowed softly under the lights. He sat down once more, not to perform for an audience, but to reflect on what had happened. He let his fingers brush the keys, playing a gentle melody that carried the memory of the night. He felt a sense of peace and fulfillment, knowing that he had expressed the music that had lived inside him for so long. The performance had been more than notes on a piano. It had been a story, a connection, a shared experience. The janitor understood that the courage to step forward, the dedication to practice, and the willingness to express himself had created something remarkable. Over the following days, the concert was talked about everywhere. People shared stories of the janitor who had stunned the audience, who had transformed the hall with his music. Some were inspired to pursue their own passions, to take risks they had been afraid to take. Others reflected on the power of talent and dedication, realizing that greatness could appear in the most unexpected forms. The janitor returned to his work, cleaning the hall as he always had. But now, he carried something new with him. A sense of confidence, a quiet joy, and the knowledge that his music could touch hearts. Every time he passed the piano, he remembered the faces in the audience, the silence, the applause, and the connection he had created. Music had always been his secret world, and now it had become a shared experience, a gift to others and to himself. He continued to practice, exploring new melodies, improvising, and expressing the emotions that filled him. The hall, once a place of work, had become a place of inspiration, a sanctuary where talent and heart could shine. And in the quiet moments, when the lights were dim and the hall was empty, the janitor would sit at the piano, letting the music carry him once more, knowing that he had discovered the power to transform not only himself but the world around him through the language of the heart. After the unforgettable performance, the hall slowly emptied, leaving only echoes of applause and the faint scent of polished wood. The janitor stayed behind for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. He ran his fingers lightly over the piano keys, feeling the vibrations still lingering from the music he had poured into them. It was a quiet moment, filled with reflection, satisfaction, and the knowledge that something had shifted, not just in him, but in everyone who had witnessed the performance. The following morning, news of the janitor's performance spread quickly. Social media posts, messages among friends, and local newspapers described the remarkable story of a janitor who had stunned a professional audience, and even a world-renowned pianist with his talent. Headlines praised his courage, dedication, and the beauty of the music he had shared. People could not stop talking about how someone so ordinary in appearance could create something extraordinary through skill, practice, and heart. The janitor returned to his usual duties in the hall, pushing his mop, dusting chairs, and cleaning floors, but the world around him seemed subtly different. People smiled, waved, and whispered words of encouragement. Some approached to compliment him, but he always responded with a humble nod or quiet words, never letting fame change his simple life. The performance had brought him recognition, yes, but more importantly, it had affirmed the power of following one's passion and staying true to oneself. One afternoon, the pianist who had mocked him weeks before approached him backstage. Her eyes reflected a mixture of respect and apology. She extended her hand, and he shook it gently, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She spoke softly, acknowledging that she had underestimated him, and praised the depth, emotion, and originality of his performance. There was no bitterness between them, only mutual understanding and respect. For the janitor, this was not about revenge or proving someone wrong. It was about the music, about honesty, and about courage. Her acknowledgement mattered, but it was secondary to the fulfillment he felt from expressing himself. In the weeks that followed, the janitor continued to work in the hall, but music became an increasingly central part of his life. He began to teach young children in the neighborhood, sharing his melodies, rhythms, and passion with them. He showed them that formal training was not the only path to creating beautiful music, that dedication and heart could carry one a long way. His students were inspired not just by his skill, but by his humility and his story of quiet persistence. Many children, once shy or unsure of their abilities, began to embrace music with newfound confidence, motivated by his example. The hall itself became more than a place for concerts. It became a space for inspiration, learning, and connection. Staff and regular visitors began to notice subtle changes. People lingered to listen when he practiced, and occasional performances outside official events drew small audiences who wanted to experience the unexpected beauty of his music. His presence transformed the atmosphere, bringing warmth, calm, and a sense of hope. The janitor's life, once simple and routine, had grown rich with meaning and purpose. Reflecting on his journey, the janitor often thought about the moments that had brought him here. He remembered the first night he had dared to ask the pianist if he could play, the sting of her laughter, and the awkward silence of the audience. He remembered the hours of practice in solitude, the melodies he had composed in his mind, the nights when the piano had been his only companion. He realized that every challenge, every doubt, every moment of embarrassment had shaped him, prepared him, and strengthened his connection to music. These memories no longer brought shame, only understanding and gratitude. He also thought about courage, not the kind celebrated in stories of heroism, but the quiet, steady courage that comes from following a passion despite fear, doubt, or ridicule. The courage to sit alone at a piano late at night, to practice tirelessly, and to face an audience without knowing what would happen. The courage to believe in himself when no one else did. This courage had carried him to a place where his music could touch the hearts of others, where his story could inspire. It was a lesson he carried with him every day. Occasionally, he would encounter people who doubted him or questioned his abilities. He would smile and let them speak, not needing to defend himself. His music had already proven more than words ever could. He continued to practice diligently, exploring new melodies, improvising, and refining his pieces. He experimented with styles, textures, and rhythms, always striving to express more, to connect more deeply, and to grow as a musician. Each evening, when the hall was empty and the piano waited silently, he would sit and play, not for applause or recognition, but for the love of music itself. The community began to embrace his story fully. People were inspired not only by the janitor's talent but by his humility and dedication. His life became a symbol of perseverance, proving that extraordinary things could come from the most ordinary circumstances. His journey encouraged others to pursue their own passions, to take risks, and to nurture the talents that lay hidden inside them. The janitor had become more than a performer. He had become a teacher, a mentor, and a source of hope. Over time, he also built friendships with fellow musicians, local teachers, and aspiring performers. They admired his insight, his creative approach, and his unwavering devotion to music. He collaborated with them occasionally, sharing ideas, composing new pieces, and exploring new possibilities. Yet, he remained grounded, never forgetting the quiet joy of discovering music alone in the hall late at night. Fame and recognition had changed little about his character. They had only expanded the reach of his music. Every so often, he would think back to the pianist who had once mocked him. He realized that her reaction, though initially hurtful, had been a catalyst. It had sparked the determination to prove nothing to anyone but himself, to embrace his gift fully, and to take the risks that led to transformation. He forgave any lingering bitterness, understanding that the journey was what mattered most. The lessons he learned from that encounter stayed with him, shaping his approach to life and music alike. As the years went on, the janitor continued to work at the hall, but his life had expanded into realms he had never imagined. He performed at local events, taught children, collaborated with other musicians, and shared the joy of music wherever he could. His story became well known in the community and beyond, inspiring articles, interviews, and even short documentaries. But through all the attention, he remained humble, grounded, and focused on the music that had always been his companion. The hall itself seemed to embrace his presence. Its walls, once silent and simply functional, now seemed to resonate with life and stories. Visitors felt a sense of calm and inspiration, whether they heard the music live or learned of the janitor's story. The space became a place where ordinary people could encounter something extraordinary, reminding everyone that talent, passion, and courage often reside in unexpected places. One evening, after a long day of teaching and practicing, the janitor sat alone in the hall. He ran his fingers across the piano keys, letting the notes linger in the empty room. He reflected on the journey, the challenges, the fear, the joy, and the courage it had taken to reach this point. The music flowed effortlessly, carrying the essence of every experience he had lived. He smiled quietly, knowing that he had found his purpose, that his music had become a voice for himself and for others. He realized that recognition and applause were only part of the story. The true reward was the ability to share his gift, to inspire, to connect, and to live fully in the passion that had guided him for so long. Every note he played carried history, emotion, and meaning. Every melody was a story, and every story was a gift. In that quiet hall, surrounded by the lingering echoes of music and memory, he understood that he had not only transformed his life, but had touched the lives of countless others. The janitor, once overlooked and underestimated, had discovered the power within himself to create beauty, inspire courage, and share the language of the heart with the world. And as he played softly into the night, he knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would continue for the rest of his life.